Welcome back to the spooky side of the internet. Tonight's stories revolve around the theme of eerie towns, disappearing diners, and creepy gas stations. What's your true, unexplained story of being in a place that shouldn't exist? When my brother and I were 10 and 12 respectively, our family went on a hike through a cemetery and into the woods, not far from our house. My brother and I would explore these woods every day, even camped in them before. We knew it like the back of our hands. Anyway, as the family hits our usual spot by the creek, halfway through, Brother 1 and I said we'd be back in a few. We wanted to wander off further up the creek, so we did. We came across a very large hill we had never seen before. It was littered with what looked like someone's worldly possessions. As if they turned a house upside down, shook out the contents, took the house, and left. There were tons of painted X's on the trees, showing someone had intended to cut them down at some point. We poked around for a few when we thought we heard our mom hollering at us. So we turned tail and walked maybe 20 feet back down the hill to where our parents were. The entire encounter was maybe 45 minutes long on our end. As soon as our mom saw us, we got the beating of a lifetime. We had actually been gone almost 4 hours. She never saw us walk up any hill, and remembered seeing us meandering down a straight path by the creek, not turning up the hill that was 20 feet away. She and her husband and our older brother combed the woods for over 4 hours, screaming our names, and couldn't find hide nor tail of us. We pleaded our case and even tried showing her the hill. Surely she was messing with us. So we stomped up to the turnoff for the hill, and it was gone. Nowhere to be seen. For years we explored the woods, determined to find that freaking hill. We covered miles and miles of pathed woods. As we got older, we mapped it out. To this day, that hill does not exist. We never found it again. Never found the weird furniture, toys, clothes, and other household items that were scattered across the hill. And never met anyone in the area that had a clue about the hill. We probably just wandered way further than we meant to, but I always found it weird that we never found the hill again. Well, I hope you guys are ready for some creepy mystery stories, because we got a lot of those tonight. Many years ago, myself and 2 of my best friends decided to go for a day of mountain biking at Snowshoe in southern West Virginia. Now, this was way before the days of GPS, so we were kind of doing this by some half-assed directions and an old map, but the point is we got very lost. Sometime along the way, we ended up in this very tiny little town, and we figured we would ask for directions, and it was absolutely deserted. I'm talking not a single soul to be seen anywhere. We parked the truck and split up looking for anyone. Now, this was at around 9 or 10 a.m., so not exactly the crack of dawn, mind you. We went into the post office. Nobody. We went into the only bar in town, which was unlocked, unattended, with music playing, but not a single soul present. We went business to business to business, and walked the streets, and after about 25 minutes finally found an old guy who just seemed to appear out of nowhere in the middle of town walking alone. The first question we asked him wasn't even for directions. It was, "Where the heck is everybody?" To which he replied, "Well, I guess folks around here don't get up much till around noon." We asked him for directions to Snowshoe, and he pointed to the roads we came in on, and said to go that way about 10 miles and make a right, and we will find the interstate. We left quickly. We all had a very bad sense of unease about the whole thing. As we left, we were about 5 miles down the road, and hit a lady dressed up in a state road uniform standing in the middle of a very long straightaway holding a stop sign. When we approached her, she turned the sign from slow to stop. We asked what was going on. She stated that there was road construction ahead. We told her of what just happened, and she kinda laughed and said those people in that town are kinda strange, but let it slide. So we actually started talking to her, waiting for a line of traffic to come by from the opposite direction. We actually ended up talking to her for about 45 minutes to an hour, just hanging out. Kinda got lost in the conversation. Not one single vehicle ever approached from the other direction or behind us. Eventually she said, "Well, I guess it's clear now and y'all can go ahead," and slowly turned the sign from stop to slow and motioned for us to go ahead. We went straight ahead, the only direction you could possibly go for the next 30 some odd miles, and didn't see any signs of construction, state road workers, or maintenance going on at all. She had no vehicle. We figured she was a flagwoman dropped off by some of the crew up ahead. After the encounter with the town and this woman, we had enough and called it quits. We turned on the interstate as soon as we found it and headed north and home. Every single one of us still remembers this whole encounter in vivid detail to this day. I asked my friend about it actually about 3 months ago at this wedding, and it still freaks him out to no end. Man, I honestly think it's really crazy that even though the world is like so developed and it seems like we have everything mapped out pretty well, there's still just like these little hidden colonies of people that just nobody seems to know about. I think it'd be really interesting to stumble on something like this. Many years ago, my family and I moved from California to Nebraska. I was still a young kid, probably 5 or 6 years old. We were driving through Nevada, and shortly after Las Vegas, and we needed to stop and fuel up. We stopped at your typical old gas station that rings when you pull up to the pump. I don't remember it that well, but my dad told me it looked normal. He got out to stretch while my mom went inside to pay for gas. My mom said that when she walked in, the gas station had quite a few people inside, despite us being the only car there. When she walked up to the counter to pay for gas, everyone turned to her and the lights went out. She ran outside where my dad witnessed everything and helped her into the car, and we sped off down the interstate, not caring whether we ran out of gas or not. To this day, my mom says that's one of her scariest encounters because she can't explain nor figure out exactly what was going on. And yes, we found a better gas station down the road and made it to Nebraska. Man, I have so many questions for this story, but I have to admit, these are a little bit creepier than I was expecting. A couple years ago, a buddy and I got turned around on a side road in rural North Missouri. I had no service for GPS, and it was pouring rain, so I headed south towards my destination, hoping to run into a main highway. We ended up coming into the town of Skidmore, Missouri. It's a tiny town in the middle of nothing, but there's something dark about that place. Infamously, in the 80s, a man known as the town bully was killed in broad daylight, in the middle of town there. Not one person spoke up about who killed him, and it's never been solved despite many witnesses. There's also been disappearances, and a brutal crime a few years ago involving a baby being cut out of a woman's womb. Keep in mind, this is a town of only 270 people. As we drove down the main drag, several people gave us a blank but intimidating stare, completely unnerving. Once we got out of the town, my buddy mentioned he'd had a sense of impending doom, or danger, as we drove through. Weirdly enough, I'd been feeling the same way. I never had such a persistent gut feeling of danger like that before. We agreed to never ever freaking go through Skidmore again. There's something seriously evil about that town. It shouldn't exist. Well, knowing horror fans, there's probably a bunch of people listening who are already packing their bags getting ready to go check it out. So driving in rural areas in New England, near the borders of Vermont and Mass, so I'm not sure which one I was in. It was late. Well, okay, so late it was actually early. And there was fog, dense fog, like Silent Hill levels of fog. And like an idiot who dies in the opening scene of a horror movie, I'm driving on back roads. First, my headlight just up and goes out. Cannot use high beams because of fog. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I haven't seen a house or a town in a long time. The car starts making noise. Check engine light comes on. So I pull over. Nothing much around field and fog and dark. Creepy as heck. I gamely look at the engine. I can fix electronics, not engines. I tighten all the things I know. The car now won't start. So I'm in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, on the side of the road. Because of the natural rules of how things work, my cell phone has no service as well. It's like one big cliché, but I'm not stupid enough to go wandering the roads right now. So I recline my seat and decide to take a nap for a couple hours until the sun comes up. I wake up, the sun is coming up, the fog is going away, and I'm on the main street of a tiny town, parked in front of what looks like the Bates Motel house. Houses everywhere. It was the creepiest feeling. I was sure off in the woods. There was not a light on in any house all night. There was a service station 50 yards up the road. I walked up to it, talked to the guy, who looked perfectly normal. He walked over to look at the car, asked me to try and start it, and it did. Freaking thing turned over right away, and both headlights were working. I drove on, never got the name of the little village, and I couldn't find it on a map. I always felt like I was in a big setup for a horror movie that just didn't pan out. Yeah, it sounds like you were in a horror movie, but you decided to go to sleep, and then you woke up the next day in a different horror movie, but you just kind of dodged both of them. I've been living out of my car sometimes. There's a stretch of road in the southwest that runs along national forests. One night I was looking for a good dark pull-off to sleep in. I found a good one. It had trees to pull under, so headlights out of the 2-lane wouldn't be as disturbing, as it has truck traffic. In the morning, I heard a car pull off and watched as it went on past me into the forest on a 2-track. I hadn't seen that lane when it was dark. It looked inviting. I decided to try driving on it myself. It turned out to be a lovely area, and eventually I found a really nice spot under some trees out in there, where it was very quiet and I could see the Milky Way at night, although it was sub-zero most nights. I stayed out there for several days. Data service was good, so I kept applying, and during that time I got an interview invitation, the first in a long time. They called while I was sitting under those trees. The guy who had called later told me that I sounded very relaxed. Well, heartened by that call, I drove out to the highway to get some groceries and water. When I came back up the highway, I could not find the original entry port. I found another 2-track and eventually got back to the same spot, but that lane had no place to pull off and park. Months later, I took a temporary house about 40 miles from there and sometimes still use that stretch of highway. I look carefully every time I pass through, sometimes irritating other drivers. and have not yet found the original entry. None of the pull-offs have a lane at the back or even a break in the fence, and none of the lanes have even a slightly wide spot, much less a deep place with trees. I'm not that kind of person at all, which is why I re-examine that stretch every time I pass through, but I'm slowly resigning myself to having spent at least one night in a place that doesn't currently exist. I mean, I know the only logical explanation for these kinds of stories is that maybe they just forgot where they were, but I really have to wonder if these kind of stories have something supernatural really involved in them. In the interior of BC, I spent a lot of time exploring in the truck. Found loads of abandoned buildings and cabins, but the coolest place that a friend showed me was this abandoned hippie commune deep in the forest. There were some crazy house designs, one that looked like an ark, one was a 40-foot teepee clad with aluminum. The place was clearly built by people who had very little building experience, but lots of creativity and motivation. There was a lot of weird stuff I found on the property, and I even found a bike that was stolen off me the year prior. I have an Imgur album I'll find and link. If you're interested in the pictures that they're talking about in this story, here's one of them, and I will include the link in the description if you want to check out the rest, because there's a lot. Not just one, but there's a whole lot of places in rural New Zealand that will scare the crap out of someone who isn't used to it. Heck, even some of my Kiwi friends would sometimes be like, F no, I'm not hiking out there with you guys, good luck. If I had to choose one, we were doing a 5-day hike, had pretty good maps and directions. Now, there's a lot of nationally funded huts throughout the island, very well marked. We found this one random hut that was definitely not on the maps, with a bunch of older guys just hammered, partying inside. And this was way out of where these guys could have just walked up from town to party in for the afternoon. No gear whatsoever. Just the craziest looking 60-plus guys hammered in this random unmarked cabin. When we came back by later, the place was absolutely empty and musty. So they packed up their trash and stuff, but it still seemed all gross and dirty. We were all kind of baffled. Did we actually meet all these crazy hillbilly old men partying in the middle of nowhere? They obviously weren't going up there to clean it up. And where the heck did this cabin even come from, just in the middle of these mountains? And how did they just randomly hike up there with cases of beer and booze and speakers? You know, maybe some people just like to have their own isolated little place where they don't have to pay taxes, they don't have to be involved in society, they're just kind of on their own. I was relocating across Texas, and as I normally do, was driving through the night to skip traffic, and because it's more serene that way. I was driving straight through central Texas, going northwest, so seeing the hill country change to desert in the full moon was super cool. Anyways, I was driving with my wife at the time, and we were running low on gas. Luckily, we were pulling into a tiny no-name town, and we could see an old gas station come around the bend. This encounter happened at about 2 a.m. Now, this town only has one road, and this station was right at the edge of town, at the end of it. When I say old, I mean very old. The type you would have no option of prepaying. You simply flip up the handle of the machine, and you hear the pump inside start struggling to get the gas from the reservoir. It had the old-styled tick readers too, not a thing electrical on it. So I, being the young man that I was, had never seen one before, so I walked into the store to buy gas before I pumped. The store only had one light in the far back on, and I almost thought it was closed, since it was barely brighter inside than it was out in the moonlight. Upon entering, I saw the place was deserted. No customers, no workers, nothing. However, there was an odd tune playing on someone's radio that I couldn't place. An odd-sounding, upbeat piano piece was playing somewhere around the corner inside, and I heard shuffling once I walked closer to the source. This place made me feel scared. Not the, whoa, this is creepy, scared, but the, all hairs on the end, something is seriously wrong here, but I can't figure it out, scared. As I turned the corner, I saw a young man standing next to a large radio and dancing. His dancing, though, was extremely off-putting and seriously didn't match the tune at all. Though the radio was cranking out what sounded like ragtime, this guy was running his hands up and down his body and pretty much feeling himself, with his eyes closed in what looked like bliss. He was going far slower than the music, and definitely wasn't on tempo. For some reason, I couldn't speak. I couldn't even move. I was in a trance as every part of me screamed to turn and leave. Finally, I said, "Excuse me, I just need some gas." The guy kept dancing. I said it a little louder, and he finally slowed down a bit and opened his eyes, and focused on me. But it was like he was looking at a finely cooked steak. He was looking almost through me, and silently walked to the register, not saying anything. I said, just $20, please." He again didn't say anything, and just stood behind the ancient register. So I figured maybe he didn't speak the language, or was embarrassed I caught him dancing. So I laid the money on the counter, and went outside, hoping he'd turn on the pump. I filled up, told my wife about the weird scene in there, and turned off the pump to kill the horrible grinding noise from the interior pump fighting against gravity to get the gas up. The weird thing is, when we were leaving, I looked back in the window and the guy was still standing there behind the counter. This may sound fine, but the money was still on the counter in front of him. It was like he was a robot who just turned off once I left. This is where it gets super weird. A couple months later, I was driving back to San Antonio to visit family, and we figured we'd stop at the old gas station to see it in the daytime, since it had become somewhat of a running joke between us. We pulled into this tiny town, and the thing was gone. The lot it sat on at the end of the road wasn't even there. It was just grass. No rubble, no old pump, no lighting, nothing. It was like something picked it up and moved it. It looked like nothing had been there for years. Still get freaked out thinking about it. Man, see, the problem with me reading these stories right now at 3 a.m. is that it's going to be a little bit difficult for me to go to sleep tonight. Hopefully I don't run into any drugged up hippies dancing in my dreams tonight. I was driving through Illinois to get to Chicago about a decade ago with a group of friends, and we stopped at a Taco Bell. The first thing we noticed was that the workers were acting very odd. Everything they said was monotone and rehearsed. After sitting in this fairly busy restaurant for a bit, we kind of just all looked at each other at the same time as we realized that none of the conversations happening around us made any sense. The people were speaking, it was English, but the sentences weren't logical. They were just saying words at each other. We didn't say much about it until we got outside, at which point we all freaked out and confirmed each other's experiences at once, and got the F out of there. We jokingly refer to that place as the NPC training center, since the people didn't seem to be real, or they were learning how to be human or something. Still freaks me out. I mean, for the first time in this video, we can maybe play it up to it being just a practical joke, but even still, this is just super weird stuff. There's this old abandoned hotel a couple hours away from me. It's not like a modern hotel, but like an old Victorian house that was turned into a B&B. It's totally boarded up, big fence around it with barbed wire. Apparently it's pretty haunted. In high school, me and some friends went to check it out. It's in the middle of the circular road. Not a roundabout, but you can go around several times before feeding back into the main road. It takes about 90 seconds to go around this circle. Anyway, the first time we drive through, all the shades on the windows were drawn. We drive around again, only half of the shades are drawn. The next time we drive by, all of the shades are open. We drove around one last time, and all the shades were drawn again. We freaked out and drove out of there. Man, I know people don't want to share too much, but I really wish that they'd actually, tell us the location that these things happened in. I mean, I'd love to just do a cross-country, horror-searching road trip. My grandparents had a big farm when I was growing up, and all the grandkids would help work it over the summer when we were out of school. Anytime we saw a rabbit, we were supposed to get it with our hoe or grab the shotgun. I was around 12 or so when I saw a little rabbit in the beans, and I didn't want my grandfather to see it, so I tried to chase it off. I followed it into the brush, on the land, and for whatever reason I just kept following it, because usually I'd lose sight of them pretty quickly once they hit the brush. I kept following it until I found what was clearly an old barn ruin. These are pretty normal to happen upon where I'm from, and they're fun to look around inside. So I went in. It was weirdly kept up really well, and antique tools in great shape and fresh hay. I worried I had crossed into our neighbor's property, so I hightailed it out of there. I asked my grandfather about it, and he said our land went way far past what I had described, and I couldn't have left our land in the short amount of time I was gone. So he followed me out there, and we couldn't find it. I checked every summer I worked there, and never found it again. Not creepy, but it always drove me crazy where that stupid barn went. I'm honestly just surprised at how many people have stories like this. This seems like a topic that would be hard to actually fill up a video with stories, but there's somehow just so many of them. So one, there's a town right near me in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where a whole street full of families disappeared overnight back in the 70s. Everything was left behind. No trace of them to this day. You can go on Google Maps and look it up. The houses are abandoned and almost closed off from the rest of the town. There was another instance that I'll never forget. I read it here on Creepiest Google Map Places. A man in Canada decided to drive until a highway stopped, sometime in the past couple of years. I believe he started in Winnipeg and kept going north or northwest until he ran out of road. About 1 or 2 hours before he got to that point, he saw a lot of cars parked off the side of the road. Keep in mind that there wasn't a single gas station or store nearby, and hasn't seen a house for quite some time. There was a lot of about 30 to 35 old cars, probably from the 50s or 60s, and in the distance he saw a cavern entrance that was faintly illuminated by light. He noticed the tail end of a group of people dressed in all black walking in. No signs were around advertising it, and he said he couldn't find anything about it on Google Maps. He posted this a year ago, and the trip was even further back from that. I reached out and tried to get any markers or nearby areas I could to do my own research by, but he said he couldn't remember the specifics. Still makes me wonder to this day what was going on there. Wait, so you mean these cultists didn't leave a Google review on the cave they decided to do their hidden ritual in? Well, I guess we'll never know how it went then. When I was about 12, my mom and I were traveling cross-country to move. We were staying the night in Missouri, at a typical roadside hotel next to the Applebee's, so we went in for dinner. It was packed, despite us being one of only a couple of guests at the hotel, so we sat up at the bar. We noticed something weird after a few seconds. Every single person had a glass of milk in front of them. Even the dudes around the bar. Nothing else, just a tall glass of milk. Someone opened the fridge under the center bar, and we just saw gallons of milk. The bartender took our dinner orders and brought us each a glass of milk without asking us for anything to drink. It was so freaking weird. My mom told me not to drink it. On our way back to the room, my mom stopped at the front desk and asked the woman working there, half jokingly and half concerned, why everyone drinks so much milk in this town. The woman said she had no idea what she was talking about, and we just moved on. When we were putting our leftovers in the mini fridge up in our room, there were like 10 mini cartons of milk. No brand, just the word milk in black lettering. It was a weird place, and I've never been able to figure it out. Well, I guess people in Missouri just have a lot of cows and drink a lot of milk. A group of friends and I decided to take a small Saturday afternoon road trip into the back country of South Carolina. We figured we'd just drive around, head southwest, and see if we could find any antique shops, cemeteries, abandoned buildings, and the like. We pile into my car and start driving. It's about an hour of nothing. Just some light conversation and southern pine forests. We pass a few horse farms, some quaint old mill towns, and a few gas stations, but nothing interesting yet. 2 p.m. rolls around and we decide we wanted to get something to eat. As a rule, we always like to try local diners and restaurants, so we kept driving until we saw a faded road sign for a town. It was about 5 miles down the road, and we figured that's good enough. As we're driving through the town, we notice there's no one out. No cars on the roads, no people on the streets, and no real houses. The streets are lined with abandoned and boarded up warehouses, shops with broken windows, and a few broken down cars from the 90s. The further we go, the worse it gets. We finally get to a diner that's right off their main street. It looks like there's about 10 people eating inside, and there's a few cars in the parking lot. Seems like they're open. Here's where it starts to get weird. We open the door and step in. As soon as we clear the threshold, everyone stares at us. It's like in the movies where the record scratches on the jukebox and everyone looks, except far more uncomfortable. In the middle of the diner is a large table with 6 people around it, who all turn back to their food and start whisper talking. The waitress nervously shuffles up to us and quietly asks how many. My friend Chris takes the lead and says 4, in just a normal speaking voice. Everyone looks at us again, and the waitress, who is barely older than 16, recoils, but takes us to our table. She sat us in a basic 4-top near the large table in the middle. She takes our drink orders and leaves. Once she goes, we all whisper about how weird that was. While we're talking, the line cook is just staring at us with this violent look in his eyes. We all figure out what we want and wait. We sit in awkward silence for about 10 minutes before the waitress comes back. She takes our orders and disappears into the back of the diner, leaving us alone in the dining room with people at the other table. It gives us time to look them over. They're a basic southern family, chubby, haggard-looking wife, husband with sun-leathered skin and oil stains on his coveralls, 3 children, all girls, all in nice Sunday dresses, and then her. The other woman was dressed like the younger girls, but looked very much in her 40s. She wore a red, paisley-patterned dress, with frilled lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was long and stringy and covered the bulk of her round face. To the left of her was a doll, seated in a high chair for babies. The woman would sometimes lean in towards the doll and whisper something, then giggle. Soon, the waitress dropped food off at their table, but set a meal down for the doll, too. She commented on how pretty the woman's daughter was and left. About 10 minutes later, she came back with our food, silently left it, gave us a side eye, and walked away. The waitress came back to refill the other table's water, where she asked everyone how the food was, but asked the doll too. When she asked the doll, she spoke in a baby voice. The woman then picked up the doll, held it in front of her face, and spoke in a little girl's voice. She was being the doll. My other friend looked at me with the most terrified, wide-eyed expression. She worked with disturbed children as a therapist in a court-mandated facility. We shoveled our mediocre food down, and my friend Chris just dumped $40 on the table, and we left. As we were leaving the town, Chris was looking for any sort of town name. I was checking to make sure we weren't being followed. This happened about 6 years ago, and we still can't find that town. No one remembers the name, or the road it was off of, but we remember being there and what the diner looked like. Well, that is all for our creepy hidden town stories. I actually think stories like this are really interesting. If you guys have any movie recommendations that are similar to these, let me know. Also, don't forget to check out that whole photo album that was posted with one of the stories in here too. And yeah, this video went pretty long. So the reason some of these videos are super long and some are super short, it basically just comes down to how many good stories and how long the stories are that I find. Because I'll generally just find a good thread and then just pull as many of the top stories as I can and then read them all out and then just cut out the bad ones. But there were just a lot of really good ones this time. So thanks for watching. We're getting even closer to Halloween. I farm in a rural town in the western U.S., and our farm is a ways out of town, so naturally it's pretty eerie at night. We flood irrigate, so the water needs to be moved from field to field, and those water changes just come whenever the fields are finished. At each of the, at each end of our farm, there's a big row of trees that once get At each end of our farm, there is a big row of trees that once again gets kind of eerie at night. So my dad and I are driving down the farm